Welcome to this episode of Thrive With Us. Today I'm sitting with Dr. Christian Perrin with a PhD from Nottingham Trent University in the UK. He has been with us at Thrive since February 2025, and he is also working as a professor at Birmingham University in Dubai. Today we're going to talk about one of his specialty areas, which is OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder. We're going to talk about what it is, what it looks like, and dispel some of the misconceptions that many people have now that this term is being used more loosely and loosely with the kind of proliferation of social media. So welcome, Christian. It's great to have you, and I look forward to our chat today.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm looking forward to it. I have a real closeness with OCD in a number of areas, and I'm really looking forward to getting into those topics. I think especially the misconceptions around OCD are really important to address. So I'm looking forward to it.
So let's start with describing OCD. What is it actually? I know the term gets thrown around a lot. A lot of people label themselves and other people in their lives as OCD, but what does it actually mean from a clinical perspective?
Yeah, good question. Where to begin with this one? So OCD stands for obsessive-compulsive disorder. So I guess it's worth diving into each of those components. So by obsessions, we're often referring to a collection of internal symptoms that someone with OCD is going to experience. So in the obsessional part of it all, someone's going to experience internal intrusive thoughts. We call them intrusive thoughts because they're often very worrying, very unpleasant, and they cause a lot of discomfort and anxiety. So they're intrusive, they're difficult to get rid of, and they're internal thoughts or obsessions. So that's what we mean by the obsessional thing. So someone with OCD is likely going to have a collection of internal obsessions, thoughts that are very intrusive and uncomfortable, and they'll be in particular domains, which I'll come to in a minute. The compulsion bit is that in response to an obsession or a thought that is intrusive and uncomfortable, we as humans have this innate desire to seek safety. You know, you have a very uncomfortable, awful thought, and you want to get away from it. Mm-hmm. One way that people with OCD use to get away from it is they do a compulsion. So, for example, if I have a thought that there are germs everywhere and I'm going to get contaminated with some awful illness or bacteria, then I might start using hand sanitizer. Now, that's a very normative thing to do. But if I start using hand sanitizer, 20 times a day, it starts to become abnormal. If I start then wiping surfaces down, repetitively, then that becomes abnormal and it becomes a compulsion. So I now do a compulsion routinely, ritualistically, to get rid of an obsession, a thought that I'm having all the time. So by compulsions, we're usually referring to behaviours that we can see. Obsessions, we can't see them. Mm-hmm. This is one of the reasons why OCD can be very difficult to diagnose and difficult to deal with. Mm-hmm. The disordered bit refers to when that cycle of obsessional thinking, intrusive thinking, and compulsions becomes almost a core part of someone's existence. To the point where they might be struggling at work, they might be struggling in the relationship, and it's causing other symptoms like depression, anxiety, and so the person's life has become disordered in some way as a consequence. So that's what we mean by OCD. Of course, I just moved this, I'm going to move it back. Of course, in I guess like populist and entertainment media portrayals of OCD, we see these stereotypes of people being overly clean, overly neat and tidy, and this has led to people believing that everyone's a bit OCD. And I think what they mean is if people like their knives and forks to be in perfect alignment when they sit down to eat, or they like their shoe rack to be absolutely neat and tidy, then they think they're a bit OCD because for whatever reason, through stereotypes and portrayals, they've come to believe that OCD is about neatness and tidiness. Now, there are elements of that possibly in someone's expression of compulsions, but that really misses out the disordered aspect of OCD. And one thing I want to highlight, and I will repeatedly, is that OCD is incredibly unpleasant for people who suffer. It's a disorder. It really interrupts people's lives in an incredibly distressing way. It can feel inescapable, and there are very real emotional and physical consequences to having it. I believe it's ranked, not that ranking these things is a nice thing to do, as the 7th most paralyzing condition to have across physical conditions as well as mental ones. So as we're talking about, almost a paralyzing disorder.
And what you've just shared, first of all, is very helpful in breaking down the word into the obsessive bit, the compulsive bit, and very importantly, the disordered bit. And it really reminds me of the conversation that I had with Chastity about the disorder and how now, as people are becoming more and more familiar with some of our terminology because they're exposed to these things through various social media platforms, a lot of times the words are used without recognizing their heft. And you just brought up something that I was unaware of. The 7th most paralyzing condition, that's really incredibly significant. And so to mislabel someone who maybe has the trait of being orderly or conscientious as being OCD does a disservice both to that person, but also for the people that are struggling and, as you said, often silently.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it also can create stigma, stereotypes, and barriers to treatment. People can be shamed and embarrassed about taking their experience of OCD seriously when they keep hearing these "I'm a bit OCD as well" kind of ideas. And so it's definitely something that we want to challenge. It's something that over the years I'm more fervently challenged. I felt like I was being a pedant in early years, but then I realized the importance of doing it. So when someone says, "Oh, I'm a bit OCD," I'll call them out on it and give them a bit of a hard time, and I'll try to explain, what they really mean when they're saying that. And I think one thing to express about this is that someone who's really suffering with OCD is going to have suffered for a period of months. There's going to be a sustained presence of certain symptoms over many months, and there'll be levels of distress, that correlate to the kind of diagnostic criteria. And that can be different from someone who considers themselves a bit OCD, but also different from someone who may have an obsessive-compulsive personality type, but not meet the threshold for OCD. So it is a bit confusing. People can be more obsessional than others. People can have obsessive and compulsive personality traits and types, as you mentioned, but they wouldn't be anywhere near the threshold for having OCD.
Earlier, you were saying that the obsessions and the compulsions tend to localize around certain domains. Can you walk us through what some of those domains are?
I can, yeah. And we're learning about more of them. It used to be that there was, 4 clear domains. And now, depending on what you read and the type of clinician you are, we could probably talk about 20 or 30 domains.
Wow.
And there are domains which relate to the types of intrusive thoughts that people get. And then there are domains which relate to the types of compulsions people do, right? So, for example, people might do repetitive compulsions that are physical. They might do internal compulsions, such as counting. They might say a particular mantra in their head. And so that points to some of the complexity of dealing just with the compulsions. In terms of the thoughts that people have, these tend to be clustered around harm. We call it harm OCD. And that can be thoughts of harming yourself or harming someone close to you. And this can be incredibly worrying for the individual because, for obvious reasons, they're terrified that they might actually harm somebody. And this can create a lot of misconceptions in the public. The public can think that people with harm OCD are dangerous. There's pretty much no record whatsoever of anybody with harm OCD harming anybody. The reason they have thoughts is because it's simply the most inappropriate and awful thing they can think about in that moment. And people with OCD tend to be kind of fervently moral and very high ethical individuals. And so, of course, harm OCD attacks that individual's value of compassion, kindness, care. And that's why it sticks around. So, for example, someone with harm OCD might watch a movie in the cinema with friends, and there's a scene in the movie where someone is harmed, someone's attacked, a common thought is that someone is stabbed in the movie.
Okay.
And then they'll just have a quick thought, oh, that's awful. Imagine someone I know getting stabbed, or imagine stabbing someone. Oh my God, why did I think that? Why did I think that? Do I want to stab somebody? Oh my God, what if I want to stab somebody? What if I could be a killer? Now, somebody with OCD is going to go on a whole train of obsessional thinking about that now. Someone without OCD will still have that thought. We all have thoughts, but they just won't respond to it in the same way. So for some reason, and those reasons are to do with, brain structure, and a lot of things that we just don't really know, neurochemicals firing in certain ways, the person with OCD is going to latch onto that thought. We call OCD the doubt disorder because there's always a bit of doubt, right? So while it's very unlikely that person is a killer or they're going to harm anybody, you can never know 100% that someone's not going to get sick. Someone might not harm someone. There might be accidental harm. So that uncertainty creates this tension. And then that's when a need for a compulsion might arise. So in that example, the person goes home and removes the knives from the kitchen. Okay. They throw all the knives away because they just don't quite trust that they had this thought, innocently, and it doesn't mean anything. They're attaching meaning to it. Okay. So one cluster is harm OCD. Okay. Another is, which is fairly prevalent, is contamination OCD. So the person fears, getting a disease or picking up some bacteria from a door handle or handshaking. So the compulsions become sanitizing, obsessively cleaning, not touching door handles, refusing to shake hands, that kind of thing. And the important thing to know is that each time the person does a compulsion, the initial fear gets stronger. They're in a cycle now. And it's kind of your mind is kind of saying, okay, you did a compulsion to avoid this worry. That means the worry must be real. And you're going to need to do it again. And you're going to need to keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, as you were sharing about the contamination OCD, what was top of mind for me is obviously the COVID-19 pandemic, where the behaviors that you just described, I did all of those things, and I know a lot, if not most people, did them as well. Sanitizing things that enter the house, not having contact, wearing masks, and all of that stuff. That was a fairly normal response to the pandemic. But my question for you is, what happened to people with contamination OCD before the pandemic? How did you see that play out either in your clinical practice or in the research that you consume on this area?
Yeah, you mean in terms of the compulsions that they tend to do?
Yeah, like did it exacerbate? Because now the things that the obsessive thoughts and the compulsions are relatively normalized, right?
Well, this right here is one of the difficult things to approach in treatment, right? Because unlike maybe with certain anxiety disorders like social anxiety disorder, where the person might have very irrational fears, and a CBT approach is going to be about challenging the evidence from both angles and restoring and defusing and reframing. There is a very real threat with something like health anxiety or a contamination OCD. You might well get something awful. And that's where the work is. It's like, well, yes, you might. There is uncertainty. And one of the kind of things that I'm often getting clients to say is, in order to be anxiety-free, I must be uncertain. Because you can never get certainty.
True.
And so pre-pandemic, it would have been, distinct triggers that people would have been affected by with contamination OCD. During and post-pandemic, there's a whole host of triggers now, and elements of the compulsions have become normalized and through kind of government narratives enforced. So now people with contamination OCD who might have done a bit of work on exposure and preventing their compulsions are now being told and mandated to do all the compulsions that they might have been avoiding. So a real rough time for people with contamination OCD. And we have indeed seen a real rise in contamination OCD and a kind of entrenchment of those symptoms. So yeah, it's this is part of the problem, that there are kind of triggers, and there are scenes and pieces of material everywhere that we kind of come across that can act as I guess triggers that can make people uncomfortable. Another area is false memory OCD.
Okay.
This is a really kind of troublesome one for a lot of people, because they can really believe that they did something, but just can't quite remember if they did it or not.
Oh.
And so there's doubt that creeps in. So they may well believe that they went out a week ago and in a meeting they said something really inappropriate and rude to a colleague. And initially they know that it's irrational and they know they definitely didn't say that and they would never, but they start to think, I think I might have done. I can't quite remember. And of course, if you dwell and ruminate enough, you can convince yourself of anything. So people can then start to believe, I think I said that. I need to go and apologize or check. So the compulsion becomes, they might go to that person and say, hey, is everything okay? Like, did you have a good weekend? And they're trying to feel that person out to see if they're okay with them. And they might, as a consequence of that, feel like the person was a bit quiet with them, which creates more need for reassurance. So they might go to somebody else. They might start recording themselves to see if they actually say anything out loud, and they'll replay the recording.
Okay.
And there's a multitude of examples within false memory OCD, and there's many others that are cropping up. Perfectionism OCD. Can't send an email if it's not perfect, if I've not found the right word. If I do, then something bad's going to happen. But I think that, and we could go on, but I think the theme is that there is a very uncomfortable thought that is connected to a prediction. The person is making an internal prediction that something bad is going to happen unless I do something. So unless I turn right all the way home, something bad's going to happen. Someone's going to die in my family. So I can't turn left. And when the person turns right, they'll feel a very momentary sense of relief.
Yes.
Okay, it's not going to happen now. But then, of course, tension rises again. And now, because they did turn right and they avoided something and they felt momentary relief, this feedback loop is enforced. And every time it's completed, it becomes like a prison. The person now can't escape from it because they've internally kind of justified this worry and this relationship between obsession and compulsion. And that's when people describe being in a hamster wheel, really being in this kind of inescapable hole,
Yeah, no, I can definitely see how that would play out and what that might feel like. And again, going back to what you said, that really sticks out to me, the seventh most paralyzing condition. So why don't we talk a little bit about the onset of OCD? When does it tend to kind of begin, and what are some of the causes?
Yeah, good one. So the research on this is really quite disparate. Often is with age of onset. There are cases of onset as early as 3 years old. We can track, symptoms in some cases as young as 3. But I would say that there are two distinct age brackets: childhood and adulthood. Classic age of onset for girls is around 10 years old, with some variance. There's always variance. For boys, it's slightly older, 11, 12. Classic age of onset for adults can be late teens and can be early 20s. But there's lots of variance in the data. I will say that in my own anecdotal experience, that even when onset is in adulthood, so I've had cases where onset is described as being 28 years old, when I've tracked back and asked someone to talk to me a bit more, there's been symptoms when they were younger. And often one of the early provers that I kind of know what I'm talking about and that the client can trust me, that I often use is I'll say, when you were 10 years old, and I can be as specific as that, did you do anything like jump over cracks on the pavement, spit on a grate? Did you have any compulsive behavior like picking? And they'll almost always say yes. And they'll look at me, yeah, I did that a lot. And so there are often markers and traits of these compulsive behaviors around 10, 11. Almost always I've kind of tracked back to around 10, 11, even when onset's been later. But there'll be varying degrees of discomfort in terms of obsessions. So it could be that children have this kind of predisposition for OCD and they're demonstrating an obsessive-compulsive personality type, which later, as a consequence of a predisposition, exposes them to OCD. Or it could be that they have OCD at 10, 11. Sometimes OCD in its full form is present at 10, 11 years old. Sometimes it doesn't seem to show up at all until kind of late teens, early 20s. In some cases, it can seem to come on and just disappear. It's quite common for people to get a bit of a reprieve.
Okay.
So kids can develop it at 10, 11, and it can go from like 14 to 15, 16, and then come back later. So there's no absolute pathway, but I kind of want to give an answer, and I would say that in my own experience, classic age of onset is 10, 11 years old.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, you shared a lot of nuance and layers, which I think are super important. People will present with OCD either in childhood or adulthood. However, in cases of the onset seeming to appear in adulthood, if you kind of go back in time to around 10 or 11, there's hints of compulsions, maybe the obsessive-compulsive personality style that then kind of pave the way alongside other contributing factors to the development of the disorder. So there's signs. There can be signs.
Yeah, there almost always are. Now, we've got to be a bit delicate with that because everybody, will express compulsions, to a degree. I think we've all had moments where we say something and then we touch wood that it doesn't happen. Yeah. We have little superstitions here and there. And so, one thing I wanted to do on this podcast is to really kind of normalize that and to say that we all do have elements of the behaviours embedded in OCD, but of course not to the extent that it becomes disordered. And so I think we can be empathetic on the one hand, and we can be very cautious not to think that, we all have a bit of OCD.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the example that you gave, touching wood, so many people, as you rightfully said, will engage in that. But if that was going to be an indicator of something disordered, then refraining from doing that, based on my understanding, would cause some kind of distress, right?
Yeah.
And so that, going back to that disorder piece, it's really important to remember that it's not just about having the thought or engaging in that behavior. It's the fact that one or both of those things create or contribute to distress, and there's deviance and all of the other Ds.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this kind of absolute reciprocally enforcing relationship between obsessional thinking, intrusive thinking, and compulsions that really characterizes this disorder. And it's exhausting for people. It's inescapable because it's happening in your own head. There are so many bits of stimuli that can promote a triggering episode, and so it can feel really overwhelming and inescapable for people. I think one way of describing it is that if you have an itch and you scratch it, you get immediate relief. And most of the time, that's it, you're done. Sometimes, if it's a mosquito bite, you have to keep scratching it and you have to keep going. With OCD, the intrusive thought is the itch, and the compulsion is the scratch. But when you scratch it, the worry, the itch intensifies. It doesn't go away. It might momentarily go away, but it intensifies almost immediately, and just gets worse and worse. And it usually gets worse very quickly. So it can feel very aggressive. It can feel like, this is happening so quickly that the person is quickly feeling sort of derailed, and that they're becoming someone different. A lot of people who suffer with OCD will say, I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know who this person is. And the really worrying thing for a lot of people is that as it gets worse and as anxiety rises and insight drops, that leaves them vulnerable to other domains of OCD. So many domains of intrusive thinking, harm, blasphemy, contamination, can coexist, creating this reciprocal relationship between so many intrusive thoughts and so many potential compulsions. And just one more point on that. Compulsions can also be entirely internal.
Okay.
The kind of informal phrase for that we've used is pure OCD. So this is purely obsessional, where everything happens internally. So there can be no physical compulsions, but the person is kind of in an internal sort of prison of obsessional thinking and rumination. So, for example, someone might be saying to themselves, I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person who does bad things. No, I'm not. You're a good person. No, I'm not. You're a good person. And then they might count to 7 3 times, because if they do that, then they'll think that they're a good person. And of course, that's happening all the time. And that might present as that person being absent in conversation, not mindful, seeming to be disengaged because, of course, they're so busy in their head.
Yeah, and then I would imagine that disengagement is going to prompt some kind of reaction from people in their social circle, which might then actually reinforce this idea that I'm a bad person, this person is avoiding me, or this person isn't making eye contact, or this person is declining, all of my invitations and so on and so forth. So you've mentioned a couple of times that there is a distinction between OCD and OCPD. Can we talk a little bit about what that is and how someone might be able to differentiate between them in their own lived experience?
Yeah. So I suppose somebody with obsessive-compulsive personality types or disorder can have these inclinations for kind of perfectionism or order, and can display compulsive behaviours where they may be overly neat, overly tidy, perfectionistic in the way that they go about their work. They can be obsessional about the way that they speak, but they often don't have the same levels of physical compulsions, and they don't seem to be getting as caught up in this response where the compulsion provides some relief, and then they get caught up in this kind of wheel. So I guess someone can have the sort of personality type and some of the behaviours, especially on the obsessional side, but not the compulsive side. And it doesn't reach levels of disorder, where the person is now no longer turning up for work in the same way, or they're routinely in the doctor's office. Or the relationship is struggling. So then they're not kind of suffering at the extent to which their life has become disordered. We think that, maybe individuals that develop OCD may have been predisposed to it through, that personality type and to those traits. And we think that there may be a kind of genotypic association between that personality type and a number of different brain structure, kind of atypicalities or whatever. But we don't know for sure. And there's not really a lot of use to extract from the idea of, genotypes and genetics, and the relationship between OCPD and OCD. We do think that there's a genetic load of around 40 to 50%. So in people with OCD, 50% of what they're experiencing can be tracked back to sort of genetic causes. But again, we've got to be careful with that. That doesn't mean that you're going to have someone in your family with OCD. It might be somebody with an enzyme deficiency, which is correlated to a surplus of serotonin, which is,
So basically, it's way more complicated than it sounds.
It really is, yeah. And I often feel a bit embarrassed about talking about causality because we just don't really know.
Okay.
And I'm always saying to people, the best answer to your question, even though I know it's embarrassingly insufficient, is we don't know. Because if we try to give some answers, we can then overestimate and we can kind of over-leverage or over-index on certain causal ideas. I think it's more important to think about what works in treatment.
Yeah, no, I definitely get where you're coming from. And I think in general, it's very difficult to isolate when it comes to mental health conditions, causes, and to localize them to just one. Often it's a multitude of different things at different times. And it sounds like when it comes to OCD, it's the same, that there is evidence that maybe there is a genetic component, there's a personality component, but hyper focusing on what those causes are and exactly how much it's contributing to the development and onset is not very productive.
Yeah. And I don't find that, clients are often helped too much by it. One thing that I talk about a lot in therapy is intolerance of uncertainty. This is the buzz phrase, and it is just it really describes the predisposing elements of OCD, which is that people with OCD will have a very low threshold for uncertainty. And one of the tasks that I'll get people to do, for example, is after a while, when I've got to know them and I've got to know a little bit about what might be kind of uncomfortable, I'll say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how uncomfortable would the following make you?
Okay.
You arrive to an event. You can answer me if you want. you arrive to an event, a concert, and none of your friends are there.
Okay.
So they might say 4, uncomfortable. Okay. You message your partner 3 times over the space of an hour and they've not responded. How uncomfortable? 5. You arrive at a holiday destination, your hotel's been cancelled and you've got no booking.
I think I answered that with my face.
I think you did. That's a 5. You arrive at the airport late and you know you're going to miss your flight. Okay, so I might produce 10 of those. And the client will usually answer on the extreme end. What I'll do is I'll usually put some kind of social context in there, so social events, and then some more individual ones, relational ones, to figure out where the uncertainty is especially high. And then I'll say, okay, when you rank this as a 5, so you arrive at your destination, you've got no hotel booked, the uncertainty, the discomfort, is because you're making predictions. You're making predictions that something bad's going to happen. So can you tell me what your predictions are?
I'll have nowhere to sleep.
Okay, so you'll have nowhere to sleep. You're going to have to sleep on a park bench somewhere. You might be mugged. And the person will say all sorts of calamitous things. I might be killed. My family will be abandoned. And then I'll say, has this ever happened to you? And they'll say, yeah. What happened? Well, we walked half a mile and we booked into an Ibis hotel. Okay. And it was fine. Yeah. Did you have a good holiday? Yeah, actually, it was amazing. We ended up, because we were there, we were near the zoo the next day and the kids loved it and it was fantastic. So, and it's not just an attempt to rationalize, because often OCD sufferers will know that their fears are irrational, but it's really an attempt to get them to realize that they hew towards the catastrophe. They catastrophize, not just within OCD, but in every area. So when your partner doesn't text back, what happens? What's the prediction you're making? They don't love me anymore. They've left me. They've been in a car crash. Okay. And what actually happened? They were busy at a meeting at work. Okay. So despite the fact that you have virtually no experiential evidence of all these things going wrong, you always think in catastrophic terms. Is that working for you? How's that? What's that like? Yeah. And so we do quite a lot of work around improving tolerance of uncertainty. And there's diffusion strategies that we use for that. Which I can maybe go into if we get time. But I think one of the early things to do in treatment is to really highlight that OCD occurs because of this low threshold for uncertainty, and despite that, life is uncertain, and that's one of the difficult things to get people.
It's
past.
The only certainty, really.
Right? Exactly,
right?
exactly. So that statement, in order to be anxiety free, I must be uncertain, because things are not always controllable, is a real kind of philosophy shift that you want to kind of help your client with. And, exposure response prevention, one of the gold standard, approaches for that is good for dealing with the compulsions and for dealing with that kind of uncertainty issue. And there's a number of other strategies as well.
So I wanted to ask something about kind of seeing some of the signs. Let's say, maybe someone in our audience is watching this because they have, or they know someone, or they are someone that is affected by OCD or OCPD, and they have a young person in their life that starts to exhibit things like jumping over cracks and so on and so forth. What would you recommend as the way for them to approach that?
Great question. And this is where radical acceptance and a radically different approach in the kind of terminologies of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, comes in. What you're tempted to do is to say, stop doing that. Stop doing that. That's not working for you. Stop it. Stop it. Thought stopping, suppressing, trying to not do something just makes it reoccur. There's a rebound effect. There's like 3,000 research articles on this. The cheesy example is if you're trying to hold a balloon underwater, it takes energy, it takes effort, and when you let go, it just rebounds anyway. So it doesn't help anybody. So suppression leads to expansion. So despite the temptation to deal at the compulsive level, the better approach is to try to get to the obsessional level.
Okay.
And so if you see somebody doing compulsions, gently, you might be able to say, I noticed that you're doing this compulsion. Are you having a worrying thought? Do you feel able to tell me about it? Like, I see you. Maybe people have had experience with it. So if you can say, I kind of sometimes do these compulsions, and it's usually because I have a worrying thought. Have you got a worrying thought going on? And to try to give space for the obsessional thinking behind the thoughts, obviously in a very delicate and sensitive way, because continually trying to deal on the compulsive level ends up with kind of avoidance or reassurance, and that often doesn't help. On reassurance, one of the things that we're most tempted to do, because I think it's kind of the evolutionary response, is to reassure people.
Yes.
So if somebody is doing a compulsion because maybe they have kind of health OCD or health anxiety, and they think they've got cancer, kind of the worst thing you can do is say, don't be ridiculous. You're so healthy. There's no way you could have cancer. Okay, that gives them relief. That's a compulsion. And now they're going to go to their uncle to get relief and ask the same question. They're going to go to the mum, the dad, the brother. Do I look well to you? Do I look okay? And each time they seek reassurance and they get it, they're gonna need more reassurance when the tension happens again. So things not to do is just to try to reassure, is to try to thought stop. So don't think of a red elephant. Whatever you do, don't think of a red elephant. We don't process negative commands very well. Instead, we want to make space for thought. And that can feel very difficult for the client at first because it feels unnatural just to sit there and think the bad thing. But usually when we do, and we acknowledge that thoughts, however awful they might seem, are very normal, then the tension can float away. But of course, it takes practice and time.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I heard that I just want to kind of recap with you, and then I want to ask you something about reassurance. So in terms of how to deal with or approach someone that is exhibiting that, I gave the example of a young person age 10. It's to move away from focusing on the compulsion and try to get to the thought. And if you have your own kind of personal experience, trying to normalize that, trying to really give that person the space to understand and also feel like I can share and I don't have to carry the weight of what's going on my own. Another thing that you said is that reassurance is something that people will give, probably with good intentions, and people will want to receive because they think that the temporary relief maybe is going to extend. But the follow-up question that I wanted to ask about that is being in a relationship with someone that has OCD. How do you manage that if you also don't? Because if I put myself in that position and I have a partner with OCD and maybe he's very concerned about not answering, text messages, I can see that playing out as, no, I was with a client. Like, I'm sorry, I couldn't answer, or like giving the heads up in advance. I'm going into this important meeting and I'm going to be out of contact. Like that might provide some reassurance, but is that really helping him?
No, great example. And that's a tough example because, of course, that can also cross into controlling and possessive behaviours. So we have to know what it is. If it's a compulsion based on the care for the partner and the nervousness that something bad could have happened to him or her, then providing reassurance is going to make it worse, because every time you give reassurance, it validates the worry, and then you're in the cycle. So I'm always talking in therapy about pattern interrupts. How can we interrupt this? How can we? So ERP, exposure response prevention, is about exposing the person to the fear of the obsession, and then trying hard to prevent the response. So what do you want to do right now? I want to clean the table. I want to message. I want to make a phone call. I want to go to the doctor to check that I've not got this disease. Okay, so let's urge serve. Let's sit with the discomfort for a moment. Let's alter the way that it approaches you. Let's change the voice in your head at the moment to something a bit ridiculous so that you can unhook from it.
Okay.
And there's ways to do all of that so that you're really training the person to sit with discomfort. And that might sound awful, but this is the way to combat OCD. We have to be willing to sit with discomfort, to tolerate the uncertainty, and realize when we do, the bad thing doesn't happen. The bad thing is already happening, which is living every day in our own heads and not enjoying life.
So when you have clients kind of sit with the discomfort and resist the urge, how do you choose which thing to work on? Like you gave the example of wiping the table. Do we do a little bit of a staged approach where something that's like maybe not so difficult,
yes,
and work our way up?
Yeah, you gradually build up exposures to something that's going to be more intensive, you know. So it's a classic example, but in the contamination arena, it could be something simple as, not using hand sanitizer for that session, Then you might build up to touching a coaster on the table, to holding the coaster and feeling it. And as the person is doing that, there'll be, a back and forth in conversation, and I'll say things like, how does it feel to hold that coaster? And the client will say, might say it's very uncomfortable. And it sounds really evil, but I might say, even with that stain on the side of the coaster there, how does that feel with that near you?
Is it sticky?
Yeah, is it sticky? Can you describe that to me?
Oh, God.
And the idea is to build discomfort in a safe space.
Yes. And
then sit with it. And after a while of sitting with it, the discomfort goes down. And then we go back up again and we come down again. And really what we're doing is trying to develop a tolerance of uncertainty, but also psychological flexibility with this discomfort. And then, you might graduate to holding a dustbin, holding an office bin, touching the surrounding sides of the bin, which some people viewing this might think, well, that's actually dangerous. You could get bacteria from that. But the idea is that even that is not going to be worse than living with this kind of compulsive ritual for forever. People are usually already living their nightmare. They just don't realize it. They're so afraid of the anticipatory stuff that they're already living this kind of nightmare, this prison of thought.
Yeah, no. So what is, in your experience, the tipping point for people to reach out for therapy and to recognize, because it sounds like there is evidence of it kind of starting at least small from a young age. What prompts them to eventually come to therapy?
When external parts of their life become disrupted.
Okay.
It's crossed over into work. They're not maybe performing as well. Other symptoms are kicking in of depression or generalized anxiety. People can start having experiences of panic disorder, And so it's usually when it's become really, in that disordered space, like life is now like losing its kind of stability. And
it sounds like when it's starting to infringe on other areas and not just being kind of localized to your own imprisonment.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And also as people kind of reach a point, maybe 6 months or a year where they're just exhausted. And they get to a point where anything would be better than this. The stigma of disclosing all of this to the doctor is nowhere near as bad as this. So it gets to a point where it becomes so uncomfortable that anything is better. And it shouldn't get to that point. And I think it does often get to that point because of misconceptions of OCD, because of the shame of disclosing the intrusive thoughts. That can be a big barrier. So I think we have to do a lot of work as a society to be careful about the way that we stigmatize and accidentally spread misinformation about what OCD is, so that people don't have to suffer so long in silence, you know?
Yeah. Well, as you were just sharing that, one of the things that came up for me is somebody presenting to therapy in their mind, thinking for so many years that, you know, I'm so abnormal and have all of these atypical thoughts and having the shame associated with that, and then sharing them with you. And I would imagine that there's a lot of overlap, and it's probably rare, if ever, that someone will say something that you haven't heard before.
Yeah. Yes. So there's a lot of controversy in psychotherapy about self-disclosure. You know, some people think that psychologists helping someone should never disclose elements of their own experience because, you know, it can colonize the client's experience or take away or affect the relationship. Some others think that in certain areas it can be really useful. I don't mind disclosing that I suffered with OCD for many years. So age of onset for me was pretty classic, 11 years old.
Okay.
I got a bit of a reprieve when I was 15, 16, came back with a vengeance when I was 24. And I was working in prisons. I was kind of training to be a forensic psychologist. So I had, you know, all of this material to think awful things about what people had done, their crimes. And so I was having all of these intrusive thoughts and obsessions that were so uncomfortable. And it was disrupting my life in a significant way. And the reason that I didn't talk to anybody about it is because I feared that if I disclosed any of my intrusive thoughts, they would think that I wanted the thoughts, or that I was a psychopath or a murderer or a bad person. And I remember a few things that really helped me. One wonderful woman, Gail, and if she's listening, thank you again, kind of just saw something in me at work, and I don't know how she knew. Maybe she had lived experience of OCD. But she spoke to me a few times about how I was feeling, and I kind of gently disclosed some things, but not a lot.
Okay.
And she just said one day, all of those thoughts that you have, they're not going to happen. You don't want to do them. You are not your thoughts, Christian. You just have thoughts. And it was like, wow, you know, I feel really kind of seen here. And another amazing thing happened. I was at the university and I walked past a lecture theatre, and it said OCD guest lecturer. So I went in, and this amazing woman whose name I wish I knew, and I wish I knew the organisation she was representing. I'd love to get back in touch with her. She got everyone to do a task. And a little bit of a trigger warning, I'm not going to get anyone else to do it. Don't follow along. But she got us to do a task in the room, which was very daring. She said, everyone just get a pen and a piece of paper. I want you to write down after me, I sincerely hope. So I sincerely hope. And then write the name of a loved one. So I wrote the name of my mum. So I sincerely hope the name of my mum dies in a car crash this evening. Now, the room fell silent. Pens dropped on the floor. People ripped up their notepad and threw that across the room. And she said, sorry I got to do that, but there's a very important message here. She said, right, who managed to write that down? Some people raised their hands. And she said, since you wrote it down, did you screw the piece of paper up, throw it away, or cross it out? She said, yeah. I said, those are compulsions. Said, did anybody manage to write it all down? And in your head, you've been saying, I don't want it to happen. I don't mean it. I don't want it to happen. I said, yeah, those are obsessions. And she said, that right there is obsessive-compulsive disorder. And it was just like, wow. That is really powerful.
That's so powerful.
And what she did, despite it obviously, and I've been very careful about using that, you know, since, because, you know, the potential to really upset people. But what she did was, she really normalized an awful lot of the obsessional thinking. We all have horrible thoughts and we all respond to them. Someone with OCD is going to respond in a way that's going to disrupt their life. So I think when people start to recover, they recover because they're able to talk. They're able to kind of normalize some of their thoughts, and they're able to start talking to those close to them. And I think that's the most important thing. You have to be willing to share the thoughts that you might be having, however uncomfortable. A good therapist can bring that out, but a good relationship can as well. A good friendship can.
There has to be that sense of safety in order to be able to open up and to disclose some of these things that you're carrying around all of the time and for long periods of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one last question before we wrap our episode for today. If someone is out there watching and they're experiencing OCD, OCPD, or someone that they care about, this resonates with them, what are some things that you suggest that they do in order to gain some relief and work through it?
I think one of the first things that you can do is practice a diffusion exercise.
Okay.
So when we are so consumed with obsessional thoughts and thinking, we make the error of believing that we are our thoughts and that our thoughts are just us. We call this fusion. So try to defuse simply by maybe giving the OCD a name or giving the thoughts a name. You could call it the OCD brain. I had someone call it Bob, Bob the OCD brain. And when thoughts come at you that are uncomfortable, say, oh, hi, OCD brain, or hi, Bob. Thank you for the thought. Thank you for the thought that I could have some horrible thing wrong with me, or that I could be contaminated, or I could be a bad person. Thank you for reminding me of my values, of being a good person. But I got this today. Thank you. Okay. So think of the OCD as an overbearing friend, which is trying to protect you, it's trying to remind you to take care of yourself, be a good person, don't get contaminated. But like an overbearing friend, it's just annoying now. It's getting in the way. It's calling you all the time. They're needy. Okay, so thank you for reminding me of the things that are important to me. But you're not helping me right now. I got this today. Okay, so that's just a simple diffusion exercise. The second thing is make space for the uncomfortable thoughts. Try not to thought stop. Don't think that. Don't think that. Don't think that. That's going to make the thought reoccur. Instead, experiment with thought. Let yourself think that. Practice mindfulness, 7-11 breathing, in for 7, out for 11, and just close your eyes and imagine that your thoughts are a bit like clouds passing through the sky. And notice and name them. So you might say, I'm noticing the thought that I could get contaminated by that door handle. I'm noticing the thought that I could be a terrible person who says bad things to people. And just allow it. Now that sounds like a radical thing to do, but making space for thought often breaks this tension, this struggle between thought, which makes it stick around. And the third thing, speak to somebody. If you can start vocalizing your thoughts in a non-judgmental way with someone you feel comfortable with, that can be a really useful step. For me, I was very lucky to have a lot of hilarious, sarcastic, ironic friends who could laugh with me at my thoughts. And eventually, I could laugh at the thoughts that were making me uncomfortable. I could call Phil, a close friend of mine, and say, he'd say, how you doing today, Christian? Struggling? And I'd be like, yeah, struggling. I'm having these thoughts that I've got, motor neuron disease, or I've got this and I've got that. And he's like, oh yeah, of course you have. You must have. Make sure you Google it all day. Make sure you spend your day on Google. That's not for everybody, but for me that worked. Finding humor in the thoughts. Whatever you can do to start talking about thoughts instead of keeping them internal can be a good thing. The obvious other thing is reach out to a professional. Get some help.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think today was really an eye-opening episode across a number of fronts. So one of the things that we talked about is how the term OCD is being misused and some of the implications of that. We broke down obsession, compulsion, disorder, talked about the different domains. And then we also learned that there is evidence-based treatment as well as, I don't want to say simple strategies, but strategies that we can practice
everyday strategies
at home.
Yeah.
And I think the last bit that you mentioned, so two things really stuck out for me. This expression of you are not your thoughts and getting that sense of distance, I think is really, really important. But also at the end, when you were just sharing about your own personal experience, and thank you so much for opening up about that, is this idea that even when there are evidence-based treatments, there are still individual preferences, and what works for one person might not work for another person. But the important thing, if we're going to remember, and I will never forget this now, that it's the 7th most paralyzing condition, it's to not suffer in that silence. And whether it's reaching out to a professional or trying to engage with someone that you care about and you trust, it's an important kind of first step to learning how to tolerate uncertainty a little bit more.
Beautiful summary and impressive memory. Yeah, great summary. Absolutely. I would say all of that's really kind of critical. And maybe one last thing is you're not responsible for your thoughts. You know, we can all have any thought at any time. We are thought-making machines. We can just think of our thoughts as synaptic transmissions. They don't make us evil. You're not responsible for your thoughts. So don't make that mistake of feeling overwhelming guilt for things that you think. And there are amazing treatments now out there that work. And
you're not alone. If you think that you are experiencing something that no one else would understand, or no one else has thought, or no one else has done, the odds are pretty slim that that's the case.
Yeah, like there might be people listening to this thinking, oh yeah, well my thoughts really are like next level. You would never understand. No, I've never been shocked by a thought, and I don't think I will be. This is what makes humans incredible, that we can think absolutely anything. We can think things that we would think are unimaginable, but they're really not, you know.
Yeah. Thank you, Christian, again, for all of your time and all of your insights. And as I said at the beginning, you have been with us at Thrive since February 2025, and you're also a professor at University of Birmingham in Dubai, where you're teaching in the Clinical Psychology Master's Program.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.